The music thumped through the dimly lit ballroom, the air thick with laughter and the scent of expensive perfume. It was one of those upscale corporate events, the kind where people drank just enough to loosen their ties but not enough to forget who signed their paychecks. My husband, Ethan, stood beside me, his arm resting lightly around my waist. He was never one for these types of gatherings, but he'd come tonight because I had asked him to. I was buzzing, a little tipsy from the champagne and the thrill of the evening. Across from me, James, my coworker and longtime friend, flashed his usual cocky grin. He was charming in a way that set people at ease, always ready with a joke or a well-timed compliment. When the slow song ended and the DJ switched to something upbeat, James extended his hand dramatically. "Come on, Lily," he teased, "dance with me. Show these amateurs how it's done." I laughed, rolling my eyes before turning to Ethan. I joked, "I will just dance with James all night." I said, exaggerating my tone to make it clear I was just playing around. Ethan gave me a small smile, tight, unreadable, but I barely noticed. I turned back to James and let him spin me onto the dance floor. We danced for barely 3 songs before I felt the sudden urge to check on Ethan. He wasn't one to sulk or act jealous, but he wasn't particularly social either. I figured he had found a corner somewhere to sip his whiskey and quietly endure the night. But when I turned back toward where we had been standing, Ethan was gone. A flicker of confusion passed through me. I scanned the crowd, expecting to find him in a conversation with someone from work, or maybe at the bar refilling his drink. Nothing. I excused myself from the dance floor and wove through the clusters of people, searching for the familiar broad shoulders and neatly pressed navy blue suit. A slight nervousness crept in as I moved toward the bar. "Hey, have you seen Ethan?" I asked Mark, one of his colleagues. He furrowed his brow. "Ethan? No, I saw him earlier, but that was before you were dancing." I forced a smile. "Oh, okay. Maybe he stepped outside." Stepping onto the balcony, I was met with a crisp breeze and the muted hum of city traffic. A few smokers loitered near the railing, but Ethan wasn't among them. I pulled out my phone and sent him a text. "Hey, where'd you go?" A minute passed. Then 2. No reply. I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. The unease that had started as a whisper in the back of my mind became a dull roar. Something wasn't right. Ethan wasn't the type to just leave without saying anything. I went back inside, my pulse ticking higher with each step. I checked the restrooms, the coat check, even asked a couple of people if they'd seen him. But no one had. By the time I made it back to my table, the music seemed too loud, the people too happy, oblivious to the way my world was suddenly off balance. I checked my phone again. Still no response. The joke I had made replayed in my mind. I will just dance with James all night. Had Ethan taken it seriously? Had I hurt him somehow? Or was this something else entirely? I didn't know yet. But I was about to find out. I left the ballroom in a haze, the rhythmic thump of bass fading behind me as the cold night air wrapped around my skin. My heels clicked sharply against the pavement as I crossed the dimly lit lot, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows. My mind raced with questions, but none of them made sense. Where the hell did he go? Ethan wasn't impulsive. He wasn't the type to storm off, especially over something so trivial, a joke. We'd been married for 7 years, long enough for him to know when I was being sarcastic. But there was something in his eyes when I'd made that comment, something I'd brushed off too quickly. I reached our car, or where it should have been. The space was empty. I stood there, staring at the void, my heart thudding in a way that had nothing to do with the champagne. He'd left. Without me. I pulled out my phone again, fingers trembling slightly as I dialed. Straight to voicemail. Again. Maybe he just needed air. Maybe he went home. The rational part of my brain tried to soothe me, but the knot in my chest only tightened. I called an Uber, pacing until it arrived. The driver didn't say much, which was good because I was in no mood for small talk. I stared out the window the whole ride, replaying the evening over and over, trying to find the moment things had shifted. The joke. I will just dance with James all night. It wasn't the first time I'd teased Ethan like that. We had our share of banter, playful jabs that never crossed the line. But tonight felt different. His smile hadn't quite reached his eyes. When we pulled up to our house, I was out of the car before it had fully stopped, my heels clattering against the driveway. The porch light was off, a bad sign. Ethan always left it on when he came home after me. I unlocked the door, my breath shallow, and stepped inside. Darkness greeted me. "Ethan?" I called out, flicking on the light. Silence. I moved through the house, checking the living room, the kitchen, even the small office he used when working from home. Nothing. The bedroom was the same neatly made bed, untouched. His watch and wallet were gone from the nightstand, which meant he hadn't just stopped in. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind spinning. This wasn't like him. If he was upset, he'd tell me. If he needed space, he'd say so. But to leave without a word? Without a text? I opened our shared location app, the one we both used when traveling, just to keep tabs. Location unavailable. My stomach twisted. He'd turned it off. I scrolled through my recent texts with him, as if the words would suddenly reveal some hidden clue. They were all normal, reminders about groceries, plans for the weekend, casual exchanges from earlier that day. Nothing out of the ordinary. I finally typed out another message. "Ethan, please call me. I'm worried." I hit send and stared at the screen, waiting for the little red receipt to pop up. It didn't. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Nothing. At some point, I must have fallen asleep on the couch because I woke up to sunlight streaming through the blinds. I jolted upright, my neck stiff, heart pounding with the memory of the night before. I grabbed my phone, no missed calls, no texts. I checked the driveway again. Still empty. By noon, the fear had morphed into something sharper, more urgent. I called his friends. His parents. His coworkers. No one had heard from him. By late afternoon, I was sitting in a police station, feeling both foolish and terrified as I explained to the officer behind the desk. "My husband is missing," I said, my voice shaking. And that's when everything started to unravel. The fluorescent lights in the police station buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow that seemed to seep into my skin, amplifying the coldness settling in my chest. I sat stiffly on a plastic chair, gripping my phone like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Across from me, Officer Ramirez flipped through his notepad, his expression a practiced mix of concern and neutrality. "So, you last saw your husband at the company event last night?" he asked, his pen poised over the page. "Yes," I replied, my voice thinner than I expected. It was around 9:30. We were with friends, joking around. I turned to look for him, and he was just gone. Officer Ramirez nodded slowly, jotting down notes. "And when was the last time you had contact with him? A phone call? Text message?" I swallowed hard. "Nothing since last night. I've called him dozens of times. Texted. No response. His phone goes straight to voicemail, and he's turned off our shared location." His pen paused. "You have a location sharing app?" "Yes. We both use it when we travel for work." He's never turned it off before. Ramirez's brows lifted slightly, a subtle reaction, but I caught it. He didn't say what I was afraid he was thinking, that maybe Ethan didn't want to be found. "I know how it sounds," I added quickly. "But this isn't like him. If he needed space, he'd tell me. He wouldn't just disappear." He offered a tight smile. "We take all missing person reports seriously, Mrs. Bennett. But your husband's only been gone for about 24 hours. Adults are legally allowed to disappear if they choose to. No signs of foul play, no indications of immediate danger. I clenched my fists, feeling frustration bubble beneath the fear. This isn't just about him being gone. Something's wrong. I can feel it. He sighed, closing his notepad. We'll file the report. If he hasn't made contact in the next 48 hours, we can escalate it. In the meantime, check with hospitals, friends, anywhere he might have gone. That was it. I left the station with a thin stack of paperwork and a hollow ache in my chest. Back in my car, I sat for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel. The air felt too thin, like I couldn't get enough of it. Think, Lily. Where would he go? I drove home on autopilot, my mind racing through possibilities, none of them comforting. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I was shaking. I hadn't eaten all day, but the thought of food made my stomach churn. Inside the house, everything was painfully normal. His keys weren't on the hook. His shoes weren't by the door. His scent still lingered faintly, a mix of cedar and something uniquely him, embedded in the fabric of our life together. I found myself standing in our bedroom, staring at his nightstand. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, answers, maybe. A clue. Something to explain why my husband had vanished. I opened the drawer. Inside, it was neat. Typical Ethan, organized, minimal. His watch box, some loose change, a couple of receipts. But tucked beneath them was something that made my heart skip. A folded piece of paper with my name on it. I hesitated for a second, then unfolded it with trembling hands. Lily. I'm sorry. E. That was it. Just 2 words and his initial. No explanation. No details. Nothing. I sank onto the bed, the note crumpled slightly in my fist. This wasn't just about space. This wasn't some petty reaction to a joke at a party. Something was wrong. I stared at the note, my mind replaying every conversation, every small detail from the past few weeks. The late nights at work. The distracted glances. The tightness in his smile. What were you sorry for, Ethan? Suddenly, I remembered something, a small detail from last night. When I'd joked about dancing with James, Ethan had been holding his phone. His thumb had hovered over the screen, like he'd been in the middle of a text or about to make a call. I grabbed his tablet from the nightstand, praying he hadn't logged out. Thankfully, he hadn't. I opened his messages, scanning through recent conversations. Most were innocuous work chats, reminders, texts with his sister. But one thread stood out. A number with no name attached. Just a string of digits. I opened it, my heart pounding in my ears. The messages were short, vague. I can't do this anymore. We'll figure it out after tonight. She has no idea. The last message was from Ethan. Sent just minutes before I'd turned around to find him gone. My hands went cold. She has no idea. The phone number burned into my mind. I grabbed my own phone and called it. It rang once. Twice. Then someone answered. A woman's voice. She didn't say hello. Just a quiet, sharp whisper. You shouldn't be calling me. And then she hung up. I stared at my phone, the dial tone echoing like a hollow taunt in my ear. My thumb hovered over the redial button, but I didn't press it. Instead, I just sat there, heart racing, mind unraveling with questions that had no answers. Who was she? You shouldn't be calling me. Those words looped in my head, dark and cryptic. Not who is this? Not even wrong number. She'd known exactly who I was, or at least she'd known it was someone connected to Ethan. My pulse thudded in my ears as I stared at Ethan's tablet. I scrolled back through the messages with the unknown number, reading them again, searching for some hidden clue between the lines. I can't do this anymore. We'll figure it out after tonight. She has no idea. She. Me. My breath hitched. This wasn't a coworker. This wasn't a friend. This was something else, someone else. I redialed. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail. No name, just an automated voice. The person you're trying to reach is unavailable. I hung up, my fingers trembling slightly. My stomach churned with a sick mix of fear and something darker, anger. I thought about calling again, but what would I even say? Who are you? Where's my husband? What the hell is going on? Instead, I saved the number and did the next logical thing, I Googled it. No hits. No social media accounts linked. Nothing. I leaned back on the bed, exhaling shakily. My gaze drifted to Ethan's closet, neat and organized like the rest of him. His favorite shirts hung in perfect order, his shoes lined up like soldiers. But something felt off. I got up and opened the closet door fully, scanning the space with new eyes. That's when I noticed it, his overnight bag was missing. I dropped to my knees, pulling open the small drawer where he kept travel essentials. His passport was gone too. Panic surged, hot and sharp. This wasn't just Ethan blowing off steam after an argument. He'd planned this. The note. The missing bag. The cryptic texts. I grabbed my phone and called his best friend, Ryan. If anyone knew something, it'd be him. Ryan picked up on the second ring. Lily? Everything okay? No, I snapped, unable to mask the tremor in my voice. Have you heard from Ethan? There was a pause. Too long. What's going on? I pressed. No. I haven't talked to him since last week, Ryan finally said, but his tone was off, too careful. Ryan, I said, my voice low and sharp. Don't lie to me. I know something's wrong. He's gone. Left without a word. His phone's off, his stuff is missing, and I cut myself off before spilling everything about the texts. Another pause. Then a sigh. Lily, maybe he just needed space. You know Ethan. He bottles things up. I gritted my teeth. This isn't just space. There's someone else. Silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end, the hesitation thick. He knows something. Ryan, I whispered, my voice breaking, please. If you know anything, tell me. Finally, he spoke. Look. Ethan's been off for weeks. I thought it was work stress. But, he exhaled sharply. There's been someone. I don't know who. I never met her. He'd say things. Little comments. He was distant. I didn't want to pry. My legs felt weak, but I stayed standing, gripping the edge of the dresser for balance. When did it start? I don't know. A few months, maybe. I felt like I'd been punched. Months? Months? Why didn't you tell me? I choked out. Because I wasn't sure. And I didn't want to be the guy who, he stopped. I'm sorry, Lily. I hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there, staring at nothing, my chest hollow and burning all at once. Who was she? I opened the messages again, staring at that number. Then, fueled by a rage I didn't know I had, I texted. I know who you are. Where is he? No reply. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. Nothing. But then, just as I was about to give up, my phone buzzed. One message. Meet me at the corner of 5th and Langley. 8 p.m. Come alone. My blood ran cold. Because whoever she was, she wasn't just going to tell me where Ethan was. She was going to show me. The message sat on my screen like a glowing ember, burning into my thoughts. Meet me at the corner of 5th and Langley. 8 p.m. Come alone. I read it over and over, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like the walls could hear it. The words weren't casual or hesitant, they were deliberate, almost like a command. Whoever she wasn't afraid. She wanted me to come. Alone. I glanced at the clock. 6:13 p.m. I had almost 2 hours to spiral. The rational part of me whispered warnings, don't go. It could be dangerous. Call the police. But the ache in my chest overpowered reason. I needed answers. Answers I wasn't going to get sitting on my couch, staring at Ethan's empty spot. I changed into something simple, black jeans, a gray sweater, a jacket, and tucked my phone into my pocket. Before leaving, I scribbled a quick note and left it on the kitchen counter, just in case. If I don't come back, I went to meet someone at 5th and Langley. Lily. Dramatic? Maybe. But fear has a way of convincing you that worst-case scenarios aren't just possibilities, they're probabilities. The drive across town was a blur. Streetlights streaked past my windshield, casting long shadows across the dashboard. The city felt colder, quieter, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I pulled up a block away from the intersection, my headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. The area wasn't exactly sketchy, but it wasn't somewhere I'd choose to linger alone at night either. A small corner lot, a flickering street lamp, and an abandoned gas station with boarded-up windows. Perfect setting for a nightmare. I checked my phone again. No new messages. 8 p.m. I got out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots as I walked toward the intersection. My breath fogged in the cool air, and every sound, the distant hum of traffic, the faint rustle of wind through an alley, felt amplified. Then I saw her. Leaning against a dark sedan parked under the broken streetlight. She wore a black coat, her hood pulled up, but as I got closer, I could see her face. Sharp features, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wasn't older than me, maybe mid-30s, but something about her felt older. Worn. Like she carried too much weight for her years. She didn't move as I approached. I stopped a few feet away, crossing my arms to hide the shaking. Where's Ethan? I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. She tilted her head slightly, studying me like I was a puzzle she'd almost solved. Then she spoke, her voice low and controlled. You shouldn't have called me. I felt a flash of anger, sharp and hot. Well, I did. So here we are. Where is he? She sighed, glancing around like she was expecting someone, or maybe making sure no one else was there. Then she stepped closer, just enough for me to see the faint scar along her jawline, the kind you don't get from accidents but from choices. Ethan's gone, she said simply. My heart clenched. Gone where? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her coat, and for a split second, my body tensed, ready to run. But she didn't pull out a weapon. Just an envelope. She held it out to me. I didn't take it. What's that? She shrugged. Answers. Maybe. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I snatched the envelope and tore it open. Inside were a few folded papers and, my breath hitched, a photo. Ethan. But not the Ethan I knew. He was standing with her. His arm around her shoulders. They looked comfortable. Familiar. Too familiar. I stared at the photo, my mind trying to catch up. What is this? I whispered. She watched me, her expression unreadable. It's not what you think. I laughed bitterly, though it sounded more like a choke. Oh, really? Because it looks like my husband's having an affair with a woman who... It's not an affair, she cut in sharply, her voice suddenly fierce. I snapped my gaze to her, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then what the hell is it? She took a deep breath, like she was bracing herself. Ethan isn't who you think he is. And he's in trouble. Serious trouble. My fingers tightened around the photo. What kind of trouble? She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. The kind that gets people killed. The words hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth to demand answers, but before I could speak, the sharp screech of tires cut through the night. A black SUV barreled around the corner, headlights blinding. The woman's eyes widened. "Run," she hissed. But I was frozen. She grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the alley just as the first shot rang out. The sharp crack of the gunshot ripped through the night, louder than I'd ever imagined it could be. It wasn't like in the movies, no dramatic slow-motion sequence, no time to process. It was just bang, raw, deafening, immediate. The woman's grip on my arm was like iron, dragging me into motion when my body refused to cooperate. My legs stumbled over themselves, instincts finally kicking in as adrenaline surged through me, numbing everything but the pounding of my heart. We sprinted down a narrow alley, our footsteps echoing off graffiti-streaked walls. Another shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off a metal dumpster with a sharp, metallic ping. I didn't dare look back. I didn't need to. The roar of the SUV's engine was growing louder, its headlights casting monstrous shadows that swallowed us whole. Faster, the woman snapped, her breath ragged. I didn't think I could, but I did. Fear is an excellent motivator. We burst out of the alley into a dimly lit parking lot. The woman yanked me hard to the left, ducking behind a row of parked cars. She crouched low, pulling me down beside her. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air, my chest burning like it was on fire. She peeked around the edge of the car, her jaw clenched tight. "They're still coming." "Who?" I tried to speak, but my voice was a broken whisper. "Who are they?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a small pistol from her jacket. Not for show. She held it with the kind of confidence that only comes from familiarity. "Stay down," she ordered. I opened my mouth to argue, to demand answers, but the SUV screeched into the lot before I could get a word out. The headlights swept over us, blinding me for a split second. Then everything exploded. Gunfire erupted, sharp and violent, splintering the quiet night into chaos. The woman fired back, her face a mask of focus. I flattened myself against the cold pavement, heart slamming in my chest like it was trying to escape. Glass shattered somewhere above me. Tires squealed. A man shouted, angry, guttural words I couldn't make out. Then, as suddenly as it started, it was over. Silence. The SUV roared away, disappearing into the distance with screeching tires and fading echoes. I didn't move. Couldn't. My body felt like it belonged to someone else, trembling uncontrollably. The woman stood up slowly, scanning the area, guns still raised. When she was sure they were gone, she tucked the weapon back into her coat and turned to me. "We have to move," she said, her voice low but urgent. I stared at her, my brain struggling to catch up. What the hell just happened? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached down, grabbed my arm again, and hauled me to my feet. "Wait," I tried to pull away, but she was stronger than she looked. "There's no time," she snapped. "They'll be back." I stumbled after her, my mind a whirlpool of fear, confusion, and rage. We darted through side streets and alleys until we reached another car, a beat-up sedan tucked in the shadows. She yanked open the door and shoved me into the passenger seat before jumping behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, and we sped off into the night. For a long time, neither of us spoke. My breath came in ragged gasps, my body still trembling. I kept glancing at her, trying to reconcile the calm, cold woman beside me with the insanity of the last 15 minutes. Finally, I found my voice. "Start talking." She didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed on the road, sharp and focused. "Your husband's in trouble," she said quietly. And now, so are you. I clenched my fists, my fear giving way to anger. I got that part. Why? Who the hell were those people? And who are you? She sighed, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. My name's Ava. That's not an answer. She finally glanced at me, her eyes dark and tired. Ethan wasn't who you thought he was. And if we don't find him soon, he's going to die. My breath hitched. What do you mean? I whispered. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out another envelope, thicker this time. She handed it to me without a word. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were more photos. Ethan again, but not with Ava this time. He was with other people. Men in dark suits. Meeting in parking garages. Exchanging envelopes. One photo showed him holding something small and metallic, something that looked suspiciously like a gun. I flipped through the images, my heart shattering with every one. This isn't possible, I whispered. He's an architect. He works for. He doesn't, Ava cut in. That was a cover. I looked up at her, my vision blurring with tears. A cover for what? She hesitated, then said quietly, your husband's a covert operative. And now, he's gone dark. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. No. No, he's not. He's not. Ava's jaw tightened. I wish that were true. But you saw the photos. I stared at the images again, my world crumbling around me. The man I married. The man I thought I knew. Why would he leave me? I whispered, more to myself than to her. Ava finally looked at me, her expression softening just slightly. Because he was trying to protect you. The car sped into the darkness, leaving everything I thought I knew behind. The car hummed steadily beneath us, a low, persistent vibration that felt like the only constant in a world that had been ripped apart at the seams. The streetlights blurred into streaks of white and amber as Ava drove with the precision of someone used to looking over her shoulder. I stared at the photos clutched in my trembling hands. Each image was a fresh betrayal, a silent scream frozen in time. Ethan's face, once a source of comfort, now felt like a mask, something worn to conceal the stranger underneath. He wasn't who I thought he was. The words echoed in my head like a drumbeat, relentless and cruel. I broke the silence first. How long? My voice was raw, a fragile whisper against the roar of the tires on asphalt. Ava didn't glance at me. Her eyes remained fixed on the road, scanning the darkness as if expecting shadows to leap out and devour us. How long was he lying to me? I pressed, my tone sharpening, cutting through the thick fog of disbelief. She sighed, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. I don't know exactly. But it's been years. Years. The word hit harder than any bullet. I laughed, short, bitter, and hollow. Years. That's great. We've been married for 7. Ava's jaw tightened. Then it started before you met him. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the car was shrinking around me. My memories, the vacations, the late-night talks, the little moments of tenderness, suddenly felt foreign, like scenes from someone else's life. Was it ever real? I whispered, not sure if I wanted an answer. Ava finally glanced at me, her gaze steady but not unkind. I think it was. He wouldn't have done all this if it wasn't. Done all this. Leave me. Disappear. Get shot at. Why did you text me? I asked suddenly, gripping the edge of my seat to anchor myself. Why not just disappear with him, like the rest of this twisted mess? She hesitated, then said quietly, because he's missing. And you're the only person he kept in contact with outside of our world. Our world. I wanted to scream. To cry. To shake her until she gave me answers that didn't sound like lines from a bad spy movie. Instead, I asked the question I'd been afraid of. Is he dead? Ava's fingers tightened on the wheel. I don't know. But if those men find him first, he will be. A heavy silence settled between us, broken only by the rhythmic beat of the windshield wipers as a light rain began to fall. Who are they? I asked after a while, my voice softer, hollowed out by exhaustion. They work for someone who wants Ethan silenced, Ava replied, her tone clipped. People like Ethan make enemies. This one's personal. Personal. The word tasted bitter. I glanced at the envelope again, flipping through the papers beneath the photos. Hidden among them was a small, folded note in Ethan's handwriting. My heart seized. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. Lily. If you're reading this, I've made mistakes I can't undo. But everything I did was to protect you. Please trust Ava. She knows what to do. I love you. E. My vision blurred. Not from the tears, I refused to let them fall, but from the weight of those words. I love you. It felt like both a dagger and a lifeline. I stuffed the note back into the envelope, swallowing the lump in my throat. So what's the plan? Drive around until they kill us too? Ava's lips twitched, almost a smile but not quite. We're not running. We're finding him. And how exactly do you plan to do that? She reached into her jacket, pulling out a small device, something like a phone but bulkier, with blinking lights and a tiny screen. A tracker, she said simply. Ethan's smart. If he's alive, he left a trail. The lights on the device flickered, and Ava's eyes sharpened. Got something. She floored the gas, and the car surged forward, cutting through the rain-slicked streets like a bullet. I gripped the door handle, my heart racing again, but for a different reason this time. We were getting closer. To answers. To Ethan. To the truth. Whatever it was. I wasn't sure I was ready. But it didn't matter. Because ready or not, we were almost there. The rain came down harder as we sped through the empty streets, the windshield wipers struggling to keep pace. The rhythmic thump-thump of the blades was the only sound aside from the low hum of the engine and my own heartbeat, which hadn't slowed since the moment Ava pulled me into this nightmare. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, her face tense, jaw clenched, eyes flickering between the road and the blinking lights on the small tracking device in her lap. She hadn't said much since we left the parking lot. Not that I needed her to, her silence spoke volumes. We were heading somewhere important. Somewhere dangerous. I clutched Ethan's note in my pocket, the words etched into my mind like a scar. I love you. I didn't know if I hated him or missed him more. After nearly an hour, Ava finally spoke, her voice cutting through the thick tension like a blade. We're close. I straightened in my seat, squinting through the rain-smeared glass. We'd left the city behind, the towering buildings replaced by winding roads and dense patches of trees. It was the kind of area where people disappeared without a trace. Eventually, she turned off onto a narrow dirt road, the car jolting with each pothole. The tracker's beeping grew faster, more urgent. My chest tightened with every pulse. At the end of the road stood a small, dilapidated cabin, half hidden by overgrown trees, its paint faded and peeling. A single dim light flickered near the entrance. Ava killed the engine. This is it, she muttered, stuffing the tracker back into her jacket. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. You're sure he's here? She didn't answer. Instead, she got out of the car, her movements quick and precise. She drew her gun again, holding it low but ready. My pulse spiked. I followed, my legs shaky as I stepped into the cold, wet night. The rain soaked through my jacket almost instantly, but I barely felt it. My focus was on the cabin. On what, or who, might be inside. Ava crept forward, her steps silent on the muddy ground. I stayed close, my breath shallow, heart pounding like a war drum. When we reached the door, she paused, pressing her back against the wall. She gave me a quick glance, her eyes sharp and focused. Then she nodded. In one swift motion, she kicked the door open, the wood splintering with a loud crack. She moved in first, gun raised, sweeping the room. I followed, my heart in my throat. The inside was dark, lit only by a weak lamp on a dusty table. The air smelled of mildew and something metallic, like old blood. And then I saw him. Ethan. He was slumped against the far wall, his hands tied behind his back, his face bruised and bloodied. His head lolled forward, dark hair matted with sweat and dirt. Ethan. I cried, rushing to him before Ava could stop me. I dropped to my knees, my hands shaking as I reached for him. His skin was cold, but he was breathing shallow, ragged breaths that sent relief and fear crashing over me in equal measure. His eyes fluttered open, dazed and glassy, but when they met mine, something sparked. Recognition. Guilt. Lily, he croaked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my fingers brushing his cheek gently. I'm here. I've got you. Ava moved quickly, cutting the ropes binding his wrists. He groaned as his arms fell forward, muscles stiff from being tied too long. We have to move, Ava said sharply, glancing around the cabin like it was closing in on us. They'll be back. Ethan struggled to sit up, wincing in pain. No, it's a trap, he rasped. They knew I'd come here. A chill crept down my spine. Ava froze. What do you mean? Before he could answer, the sharp crack of a gunshot shattered the silence, and the lamp exploded in a burst of glass and sparks. We hit the floor instinctively. They're here, Ethan gasped, his voice filled with panic. Ava cursed under her breath, dragging Ethan up with surprising strength. We have to go. Now. Bullets tore through the walls as we stumbled toward the back door. Ava fired blindly over her shoulder, covering our escape. We burst out into the rain-soaked night, the cold air sharp against my skin. The forest ahead was dark and dense, but it was our only chance. Ava pulled me by the arm, Ethan stumbling between us, his body weak but his eyes burning with determination. Gunfire echoed behind us, but we didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because whatever was waiting in those woods was better than what was behind us. The forest swallowed us whole. The towering pines loomed like silent sentinels, their jagged branches slicing through the faint glow of the moon. The rain had turned the ground into a slick mess of mud and wet leaves, making every step feel like walking on ice. My breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, not just from exhaustion but from the raw, unfiltered terror pulsing through my veins. Ava was ahead, her movements sharp and precise despite the darkness. She didn't falter, didn't slow down. She just kept going, dragging Ethan and me along like we were extensions of her own will. Ethan stumbled, groaning in pain, his legs barely cooperating. His weight shifted heavily onto me, almost pulling us both down. Keep moving. Ava snapped from a few feet ahead, her gun still gripped tightly in one hand. I'm trying. I hissed, my arms burning from supporting Ethan's limp body. Another burst of gunfire cracked through the woods, the shots muffled slightly by the thick trees. I didn't dare look back. Fear was the only thing keeping me upright. Branches whipped against my face, leaving stinging scratches, but I barely felt them. All I could think about was the pounding of footsteps behind us, closer now. They were gaining. Ava suddenly veered left, pulling us toward a narrow path partially hidden by undergrowth. We crashed through it, leaves and thorns tearing at our clothes. Just when I thought my legs would give out, Ava yanked open what looked like the entrance to an old drainage tunnel, rusted metal doors half buried in the ground, obscured by moss and roots. She shoved Ethan and me inside before slamming the doors shut behind us, plunging us into darkness. I collapsed onto the cold, damp floor, gasping for breath. Ethan groaned beside me, his face twisted in pain. Ava didn't waste time. She flicked on a small flashlight, casting a dim beam across the narrow tunnel. Concrete walls, dripping with moisture. It smelled like rust and decay. "Are we safe?" I croaked, my voice hoarse. Ava didn't answer immediately. She pressed her ear against the metal door, listening. After a few tense seconds, she finally spoke. "For now." I let my head fall back against the wall, my chest heaving. My hands were trembling so badly I had to clench them into fists just to feel in control. Ethan coughed beside me, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. I turned toward him, my anger flaring despite the fear. "What the hell, Ethan? What is this? Who are those people?" He tried to speak but winced, his face contorted in pain. Ava knelt beside him, pulling up his shirt to reveal a dark, angry wound near his ribs, fresh blood seeping through the makeshift bandage he'd been wearing. "You're bleeding out," she muttered, pulling a small medical kit from her backpack. I stared at the wound, bile rising in my throat. But there was no time for weakness. "Talk," I snapped, gripping his arm. "You owe me that much." Ethan's eyes met mine, hollow, haunted. "They're not just after me," he rasped. "They're after you, too." The words hit me harder than the gunshots. "Me? Why? I don't even know who they are." Ava worked quickly, applying pressure to the wound, her jaw tight. "Because of Ethan. Because of what he did." I turned back to him, my heart racing. "What did you do?" He swallowed hard, his face pale and slick with sweat. "I stole something from them. Information. Something worth killing for." I felt like the ground shifted beneath me. "What kind of information?" I whispered. Ethan's eyes darted to Ava, then back to me. "Names. Accounts. A network of people tied to things you don't want to know about." I was supposed to deliver it to someone. But I couldn't. Not after I realized what it really was. Ava tightened the bandage with brutal efficiency. "And now they want it back." My head spun. I'd been dragged into something far bigger than I could comprehend. This wasn't just about a missing husband. This was life and death, secrets and shadows. "They'll find us," Ethan whispered, his voice weak. "No matter where we go." Ava didn't flinch. "Let them try." But deep down, we all knew the truth. They were already here. A faint noise echoed through the tunnel, footsteps. Getting closer, the echo of footsteps reverberated through the damp tunnel, each step a drumbeat pounding against the fragile walls of my sanity. The darkness seemed to close in tighter, suffocating, wrapping around us like a vice. I could feel my heart racing, a frantic rhythm that matched the growing sound. Ava sprang into action, her instincts sharp, her face set like stone. She killed the flashlight, plunging us into thick blackness, broken only by the faint, distant glow filtering through cracks in the tunnel walls. The cold concrete pressed against my back as I instinctively shifted closer to Ethan, who groaned softly, his breath ragged. "They're here," Ethan rasped, his voice barely audible over the sound of my own panicked breathing. "No kidding," Ava muttered, her fingers deftly checking the magazine of her pistol before sliding it back into place with a soft click. My hands trembled as I tried to steady Ethan, his blood warm and sticky against my palms. His body felt too light, too fragile, so different from the strong, confident man I thought I knew. The realization hit me like another bullet. This was it. We might not make it out. "What do we do?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Ava's eyes glinted faintly in the dark as she turned toward me. "We don't die." Easier said than done. The footsteps grew louder, closer now, no longer echoes but real, tangible sounds. Multiple people. Moving fast. Ava pointed to a side tunnel barely visible in the gloom. "Help him. We'll go that way. They'll expect us to run straight ahead." I didn't argue. I slipped my arm under Ethan's shoulder, gritting my teeth against the weight. He groaned but managed to get his feet under him, though most of the effort was mine. Ava took the lead, her gun raised, every muscle in her body taut with tension. We stumbled through the narrow passage, the walls closing in around us. The air grew colder, damper, as if we were descending into the earth itself. The only sound was Ethan's ragged breathing and the distant, persistent pursuit behind us. Then, suddenly, Ava stopped. She raised her hand, a silent signal. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Ahead, faint voices drifted toward us. They'd anticipated our move. They were everywhere. Ava turned, her jaw clenched. No more running, she whispered. She helped me lower Ethan gently against the wall. His face was pale, his eyes glassy. I'll hold them off, she said, checking her weapon one last time. No, I blurted, shaking my head. You'll be killed. Ava gave me a look, part determination, part resignation. Maybe. But if I don't, we're all dead. Without waiting for an argument, she disappeared into the shadows. I crouched beside Ethan, pressing my hands against his wound, trying to stanch the bleeding. His eyes fluttered open, weak but focused. Lily, he whispered, his voice like paper tearing. Don't talk, I whispered, tears blurring my vision. Save your strength. But he shook his head slightly. I'm sorry, for everything. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. The man I loved, the man I hated, was slipping through my fingers. Gunfire erupted, sharp and deafening in the confined space. I flinched, my heart leaping into my throat. Ava was fighting, buying us time. But the shots grew closer. Too close. A shadow appeared at the end of the tunnel, a dark figure, gun raised. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Ava's gun from her abandoned bag, aimed, and pulled the trigger. The recoil jolted through me, but I didn't stop. I fired again. And again. The figure crumpled to the ground. Silence returned, broken only by the faint echo of Ava's fading gunfire. I crawled back to Ethan, my hands shaking uncontrollably. His breathing was shallow, his skin cold. Stay with me, I whispered, pressing my forehead to his. Please. But his eyes had already lost their light. Ava returned moments later, blood splattered across her face, her expression hollow. She saw Ethan and didn't say a word. She just sank to the ground beside me, her weapon slipping from her fingers. We sat there in silence, surrounded by the dead and the dying echoes of a life that no longer existed. When the sun finally rose, casting weak light through the broken tunnel, we were the only ones left. The truth had cost everything. And nothing would ever be the same again.